Something becomes clear today. Maybe it already has, and you are still sitting with the surprise of it. Maybe it is still arriving, coming into focus gradually as the morning moves forward. Either way, something that was previously available to rationalize, to look past, to give the benefit of the doubt, today it is harder to do that. February 25th carries a particular quality of mental clarity that tends to arrive without announcement. You are not necessarily experiencing a dramatic event. You may not be in a crisis or a confrontation. What is happening is quieter than that and, in many ways, more significant. Small things are stacking together into a picture you can no longer partially see. Behavior you had been explaining away is starting to explain itself. A situation you had been holding in a generous interpretation is showing you its actual shape. This is the kind of day where people say later that they knew, that they had seen it coming, that on some level they had always known, they just had not been ready to let themselves know it fully. Today, a lot of people are ready. To understand why today has this specific quality, it helps to hold a brief sense of what the last week has actually been. The solar eclipse on February 17th was a disruption point, the kind of astrological event that surfaces whatever has been operating below conscious awareness. Things that had been quietly affecting your life, your relationships, your sense of direction, without full acknowledgement, the eclipse brought them closer to the surface. For many people, the days immediately following that eclipse were emotionally heavy. Difficult to articulate, there was a sense of pressure without a fully clear source. February 22nd brought the emotional aftershock of that, the period where the surfaced material became impossible to manage around, where the weight of what the eclipse had identified became genuinely felt. February 23rd shifted the energy toward action. February 24th brought the first quarter moon in Gemini, and with it the specific friction of intention meeting resistance, the pressure to decide, to speak, to move. Today sits on the other side of all of that. And the particular quality of February 25th is that the pressure has converted into understanding. When you go through a period of emotional intensity, when you are forced to confront something, make a decision, have a difficult conversation, or simply sit with reality that was previously more comfortable to half acknowledge, the processing that follows tends to produce clarity. Clarity that you could not access while you were inside the intensity. The understanding arrives after the pressure, not during it. That is where you are today. The decisions and conversations of the last several days are beginning to show their consequences, their real meaning, their true shape. If you had a difficult conversation this week, you are now able to see what was actually being communicated beneath the surface content. If a decision was made, by you or by someone else in your life, today you are in a better position to understand what that decision really means. If a situation revealed itself over the last few days, today you are processing what you actually saw. Some people will recognize this as the moment they understood a person's intentions clearly for the first time. Not because those intentions changed, but because the explanations and rationalizations that had been obscuring them have finally worn thin. You have been watching a pattern long enough that today the pattern names itself. Others will recognize it as the moment a situation stopped looking like what they had been telling themselves it was. A relationship that had been framed one way suddenly reads differently. Not because anything dramatically changed, but because the accumulated evidence has reached a point where the generous interpretation requires more effort than the accurate one. Some people will notice a clean recognition of misalignment between where they are and where they actually want to be, between what they are doing and what they actually value, between the version of a situation they have been presenting to others and the version they experience privately. And some people will simply recognize exhaustion with something they have been tolerating. The kind of tired that goes deeper than being tired of a specific incident. The kind that signals that something has run its genuine course, and the energy required to continue inside it is no longer available. All of these are forms of the same thing. Clarity arriving. The truth becoming difficult to ignore. The moon continuing through Gemini today has a specific practical effect on how you are processing information, and it is worth explaining in plain terms rather than astrological ones. Gemini energy governs the way the mind sorts, categorizes, and makes meaning from the information available to it. The Gemini function is essentially pattern recognition combined with communication awareness. The part of you that notices when something someone said does not align with what they did. The part that registers inconsistency even before you have consciously named it. The part that is always, at some level, tracking the gap between what is being said and what is actually happening. Under a Gemini moon, that processing function accelerates and sharpens. You are taking in more information than usual, sorting it more quickly, and arriving at pattern recognition faster. This is why today carries such a strong quality of sudden clarity. In many cases, the clarity is not actually sudden. The information was already there. The pattern was already visible at the edges of your awareness. The Gemini moon is essentially speeding up the processing time, bringing the conclusion of a pattern recognition exercise that has been running in the background for days or weeks into full conscious view. This also explains the communication dimension of today. Gemini is not a sign that holds things internally for long. When the mind arrives at a recognition, when a pattern clicks into place, when an understanding crystallizes, there is an immediate impulse to articulate it, to express it, to share it with someone. You will likely feel the urge today to tell someone what you have realized, to put the clarity into words, to have the conversation that your new understanding makes necessary. That urge is real and in many cases appropriate, with some patience around the timing and framing of it. The other thing Gemini does today is sharpen awareness of communication itself, of what is being said, what is being avoided, what is being communicated through tone and behavior rather than through words. If someone has been sending mixed signals, those mixed signals are harder to rationalize today. The gap between what someone is saying and what they are actually communicating through their actions and choices becomes more legible. You are reading between the lines more accurately and with less willingness to explain away what you are reading. Several specific categories of things tend to surface under this kind of energy, and they are worth naming concretely so you can recognize them in your own situation. Hidden tensions in relationships reach the surface, not necessarily through confrontation, sometimes simply through a conversation revealing more than either party intended. Someone's tone shifts, and it shows something that had been carefully kept beneath the surface. A response arrives that does not quite match the question, and in that mismatch you see something you had previously missed. The hidden tension was always there. Today it becomes visible. Behavior patterns that you had been experiencing individually, each instance as its own isolated event, suddenly connect. You see the pattern. The third or fourth time a person does a particular thing, today your mind places it alongside the first and second time, and the repetition becomes undeniable. Patterns only become patterns once you are willing to hold all of the data points together, rather than examining each one in isolation. February 25th tends to pull the data points into the same frame. Mixed signals that had been individually explainable stop being individually explainable. When you have been receiving inconsistent communication from someone, warmth followed by distance, attention followed by withdrawal, commitment followed by avoidance, each individual signal can usually be rationalized on its own. Today the oscillation itself becomes the message. You are no longer reading the individual signals. You are reading the pattern of inconsistency, and that pattern is telling you something clearer than any single signal has. Unspoken truths that have been living in the subtext of your relationships and situations start pressing toward the text. The thing that everyone in a given dynamic knows, but no one has directly said out loud. Today it is closer to the surface. It may or may not get spoken today, but you are more aware of it, and so is the other person. That shared awareness, even when unspoken, changes the dynamic. And you may also notice something about yourself, a truth about your own state, your own motivations, your own level of genuine investment in something. Sometimes the clarity of February 25th is not primarily about what someone else has been doing. It is about what you have been avoiding seeing in yourself. The reason you have been staying in a particular situation longer than it has deserved. The way you have been participating in a dynamic you have been privately assigning full responsibility for to someone else. The degree to which your stated position and your actual behavior have not been fully aligned. Certain people will feel February 25th with particular intensity, and the common thread runs through how much has been left unexamined in the recent period. If you have been delaying a confrontation with reality, keeping a charitable interpretation running past the point where the evidence supports it, today the evidence asserts itself more loudly than the interpretation. This is not always comfortable. The shift from the version of a situation you have been maintaining to the version that is actually true requires acknowledging that the maintenance was deliberate, that some part of you already knew. That acknowledgement carries its own weight. If you have been ignoring intuition, the low-level signals your own system has been generating about a person, a situation, a direction, that you have been overriding with logic or hope or the desire to be wrong about what you were sensing, today those signals are harder to dismiss. The intuition you have been arguing yourself out of starts presenting supporting evidence you can no longer look past. If you have been living inside an uncertain dynamic, a relationship, a professional situation, a living arrangement where the fundamental questions have been left deliberately unanswered because answering them would force a conclusion no one was ready for, today the uncertainty starts to resolve itself whether or not anyone has a direct conversation. The actual state of things becomes more visible even in the absence of explicit communication. And if you have been waiting for confirmation, holding off on acting on something you already knew because you wanted one more piece of evidence, one more clear signal, some kind of external validation of what your own processing had already concluded, today that confirmation tends to arrive. Sometimes through a direct communication, sometimes through a behavior that removes the final ambiguity, sometimes simply through your own thinking arriving at a conclusion it had been approaching for weeks. If you recognize yourself in any of these, what is available to you today is not more uncertainty. The direction of this day is toward resolution, toward seeing things as they are. That seeing may carry discomfort, but the alternative, continuing to deliberately not see, is running at a higher cost than it did a week ago. It is worth being specific about the mechanics of this, because clarity under a Gemini moon does not tend to arrive the way people expect it to. Most people, when they imagine finally understanding something, imagine a significant moment, a revelation, a confrontation where the truth gets spoken directly, a dramatic conversation that finally puts everything on the table. Sometimes that happens. More often, the clarity arrives through accumulation of small things that suddenly cohere. A tone of voice in a text message, a pause before someone answers a question that reveals they are choosing their words carefully, something someone does not say in response to something you said, a feeling that arrives in your body during an ordinary interaction that is your nervous system communicating a conclusion your conscious mind has not yet fully caught up to. The pattern you recognize while washing dishes, not while sitting in a focused moment of reflection. The small things stack, and then at a certain point, there is a shift, a moment where the accumulated small things form a picture that is no longer ambiguous. That moment is not dramatic. It often feels quiet. The loudest thing about it is the clarity itself, and the recognition that what you are seeing has been there to see for a while. February 25th accelerates this accumulation process. Things that might have taken several more weeks to cohere are cohering today. The Gemini moon speeds up the pattern recognition, makes communication cues more legible, and reduces the tolerance for the kind of deliberate ambiguity that slows the process down. The other thing worth noting about today's clarity, it tends to be reliable. There is a difference between the kind of knowing that arrives in a moment of emotional intensity, which can sometimes be more about the intensity than about accurate perception, and the kind of knowing that arrives in a moment of relative calm after the intensity has passed. February 25th is the latter. The emotional pressure of the last week has largely moved. What remains is clearer seeing. Trust what you are noticing today, not reactively. There is still the question of what you do with what you are seeing, which requires some care. But the perceptions themselves, the pattern recognition, the understanding of situations and people and dynamics that is landing today, that is reliable information. Even accurate clarity requires some patience in its application, and there are specific ways people tend to misuse the energy of a day like this. The first is reacting too quickly to what they are seeing. Clarity about a situation or a person is not the same as a readiness to act on that clarity. The two can arrive at the same time, but they do not have to. Understanding something does not obligate you to immediately do something about it. Taking time between perception and response is not avoidance. It is the difference between a response that actually serves the situation and a reaction that is driven primarily by the relief of finally seeing clearly. Sending a message from the peak of a new realization is a version of this. When something clicks into focus, when you suddenly understand a pattern or a person's behavior or the real shape of a situation, the impulse to communicate that understanding immediately is strong. That impulse is the Gemini moon doing what Gemini does. The problem is that a message sent at the exact moment of realization carries the full charge of the realization, which often includes some portion of grief, anger, or hurt that the clarity brought with it. The message that serves you better is the one written after you have sat with the understanding for a day and processed some of that charge. There is also a risk of what could be called clarity over confidence, the sense that because you are seeing clearly now, every conclusion you draw today is therefore the final and complete truth. Clarity is a significant improvement over confusion, but it is still a limited view. You are seeing more accurately today than you were seeing last week. That does not mean you are seeing everything. Be willing to hold the clarity as highly reliable information while remaining open to the dimensions of the situation you have not yet seen. Burning a bridge prematurely is the more dramatic version of this risk. If what you are seeing today is telling you that something needs to end, a relationship, a professional arrangement, a commitment that has been misaligned, that conclusion may be entirely correct. The question worth asking is whether today is the moment to act on it, or whether you would be better served by giving yourself 48 hours to sit inside the clarity and confirm that it holds. Genuine conclusions hold. They are still there tomorrow and the day after. Reactive conclusions, which can feel identical in the moment, tend to shift once the emotional charge that was accompanying the clarity settles. The highest use of February 25th is observation, taking in what is being revealed without immediately converting every revelation into an action. Listen more than you speak today. The Gemini moon is producing clear communication from multiple directions. What people are saying, what they are not saying, what their behavior is communicating independent of their words. You will access more of that information by listening carefully than by talking. And the information available today is worth gathering before you respond to it. Write down what you are seeing. This is specific and worth doing. When a realization arrives, when a pattern clicks into place, when you understand something about a situation or a person that you had not fully understood before, put it in writing. Not to show anyone, not to send to anyone, to externalize it. The act of writing a realization makes it more concrete and allows you to examine it with slightly more distance. It also creates a record you can return to tomorrow when you are deciding what to do with what you now know. Observe the impulse to immediately confront or communicate, and give that impulse a pause before acting on it. This is not the same as suppressing what you see or delaying indefinitely. It is simply putting a small buffer between the clarity and the action, long enough to make sure the action is coming from the clearest version of the realization rather than from the emotional charge that arrived alongside it. Where conversation is appropriate today, and in many cases it is, because February 25th genuinely supports honest and clarifying communication, go in having thought through what you actually need to communicate. The core of it, what is the essential thing that needs to be said? Start there, and let the conversation develop from that honest starting point.